Hello everyone, this is Taewei Wang. This lecture is about conducting a literature review in the MIS552 class. Literature review is an important training in academic research. In the context of system analysis and design, I designed the literature review for you for two purposes. Purpose number one, you are learning the attention to detail. Pay attention to detail is an important skill in analytics. It is important to learn how to focus on detail and identify problem or solution, derive to solution in the process. The second purpose is to learn how to use framework and theory to solve a problem. We are in an age of so-called fake news. There are a lot of information out there. You don't know whether it is true or false. As a trained professional, you need to have the ability to identify the truth from the false information. Doing the literature review correctly and use theoretical foundation correctly will be the key ability. In this particular course, we're going to be reviewing four different theories, in particularly a technology acceptance model, which is the most popular MIS theory used as a foundation for your literature review. So your literature review will no longer become an exercise of searching the most popular article. Instead, you're going to be searching for the most useful and most explanatory article when you encounter a situation, a phenomena, or a problem you try to explain or try to predict. And one of the side benefit of this particular exercise is you're going to be also asked to learn APA citation style. And this will be the style you might be using in many other courses, including our capstone classes when you are asked to conduct a MIS project or writing a thesis. So why are we conducting literature review as a professional instead of a academic researcher? There are a lot of answers showing out on this particular slide. Now, in my 20 years of training in academics, I feel like most of the time we feel confused or not be able to answer a particular question. The reason being that most of the problem that we encounter in real lives are very messy. Very messy means that it is a problem very difficult to be defined. For example, when you ask the questions, why certain people do not want to use iPhone, and since if you believe iPhone is a very good, the best design in the smartphone industry. Now, the answer to that question seems to be very straightforward to some people. But if you think a little bit deeper, you understand that there are so many factors out there, and different person have different reason of why or why not to use or not to use a particular technology, and it become a very difficult and very messy problem to answer or to get answered. So doing a literature review correctly will help you to answer those questions in a more systematic way. And in the past, I believe you have done many literature review from different classes you have taken in the business school. However, I would like to show you one of the more correct way of doing literature review, which is that you need to search for something what we call a reference theory and use that theory as an important starting point to explore the question and to organize your question and thinking. And that is, I think, the most important the reason that why we are doing a literature review in this particular semester. And so the first task in doing literature review is, of course, to search for the good sources for your literature. Where is the literature is coming from, and list some of the potential source that we usually use. But I would like to emphasize more importantly that we want to select good sources. Say, for example, many of us will be doing literature review starting by doing a Google search in today's environment. And in many of this academic problem or questions, or even some of the more technical term that we are researching, you will find answer most likely in web page. A lot of people writing about certain thing on web page. In particularly Wikipedia, you will find a lot of these, say, open book exam you're taking. When you do a review or search, you'll find answer, and those answers coming from those popular web sources. But those are not, unfortunately, so good sources for evidence or literature review. And one of the things that differs us from using the web sources that web content, first of all, is not verified, and second, it changes all the time. And today you find the web page, and tomorrow the web page may be taken down by the company or the author, or the entire publication outlet will be taken down. So web content is usually not a very good source for literature review. So where should we find good sources then? And of course, your probably previous professor will ask you to do a library search, and you will find all kinds of articles, books, proceeding, magazine, journal articles, and so on and so forth, newspapers sometimes. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some of them you read and feel it's good, but from the academic perspective, it may not be so good. So it created confusion. So where is the source? What is the most reliable source you should go into? Now here are a couple of important points you should be paying attention to. First of all, you want to find the source that presents solid fact and solid finding, and not opinion and argument. So that is one. That is, I think, the ultimate criteria. Second, the rest of the criteria you see on the slide here, peer-reviewed journal article in the field of information system, you find MIS ranking journal, or find a trustworthy organization. All these are used to support the idea of a good article or good sources for your literature review. And so let's kind of focus on how do we narrow down to the good sources and find good article. And I do have one warning for you to conduct literature review especially in the technology, or if you're studying some sort of a emerging problem or question, something that is very new, very contemporary. Say, for example, earlier we mentioned this idea of fake news. So if you want to study fake news, why the fake news coming out, and how do we avoid fake news, you want to answer those questions. You want to avoid, be very careful here, so avoid something that you might be finding from a publication outlet called Proceeding. Now, Proceeding, the full name for that is Conference Proceeding, are usually articles published before a professional or academic conferences. So the professional and academics, they will prepare their ideas and writing short article before any conferences or meeting to present their idea. Unfortunately, those short article or so-called proceeding article are usually too new and are not under a very serious scrutiny. So if you use those articles, you may get a lot of good idea and stories, but not getting the real fact from or explanation from the problem itself. So a better article here coming out of research, a solid research finding, or coming from a verified and public recognized theoretical framework, or some sort of a seminal work. You go to the Nobel Prize winner, they have published a book on, say, artificial intelligence. Say, for example, Herbert Simon as early as 1978, I believe. He won the Nobel Prize and he talked about artificial intelligence. That may be a good one. Or coming from some other people who have done a very good literature review, citing by many people, will be a good idea. Finally, if you find something published by a reputable university in their PhD dissertation library, those will be a good sources for article. From the library search or the Google Scholar search, we can access to from our university. You probably will find more from the literature review and some seminal works that is probably more like a proper source for this kind of review. And other sources, including government report, company white paper, those can be supplementary, but those will not be a good sources. Not so good. Why? Government report usually have the bias from a particular political system. And in the United States, where we are in now, the government report may represent some sort of partisan view from the two Republic versus Democrat situation in the United States. So if you read the government report from different administrations from different time period, they may present not only the situation back in that particular time, but also the position, the political position of that particular government. So it's very dangerous. Another thing like a magazine, Times Magazine, Economist Magazine, the Business Week magazine, or Forbes magazine, or these public sources, and newspaper, Wall Street Journal versus Washington Post versus New York Times. All these different articles or journals and the newspaper has their own position on many topics. So it's not a very reliable source for you to. It's kind of contrary to our belief, and because when we are exposed to the media most of the time from the popular outlet, unfortunately, when we are doing a good scientific literature review, you have to avoid those publications. And a lot of these publications are used to lead or generate some sort of a marketing schemes that for you to fall into a certain trend. And in our presentation slide here, I present a theory or a model called the emergent trend or emergent norm model that is used to explain how these media try to create these ideas and norm, force you into some sort of a thinking to gain advantage or market advantage or some other purposes to fulfill their either politicals or economic purposes. So the sources can also be divided into both academic and practitioner. And we will probably, well, in one of the most recent phrase we use or heard about in news is that we want to trust science. So how do you trust science? Who is actually more trustworthy outlet or you can say channel for learning science? I think the better answer is that academic society. So you want to look more about the publication from the academic world, even though you might be a practitioner yourself. You say, well, I'm just a CIO or a front desk helper in the in a university or in a company. Why would I read this academic article? But unfortunately, this is probably the most reliable source you can get. Even though the some of the academic publication can still pose bias and opinions and some sort of misinformation, but still relatively they present more reliable information, data, and fact that you can use. So we want to use more academic publication versus practitioner. So whenever you see a practitioner's publication, be very careful. However, there are still some good publication coming out of professional journalists if they conduct good researches. A lot of journalists and magazine articles, they actually reference to academic finding and made a very objective interpretation of those findings, those are acceptable. But you have to, based on your experience and training from the university, to make a final judgment on that kind of sources and outlet. So this slide gives you a list of MIS journal, and because we are in the MIS program, and it will be a good idea to look at what are the best journal. The higher the ranking, the more trustworthy the article you can trust. Why? Because the higher the ranking, the more difficult for an author to publish in those journals, and the process of evaluating the theory, research method, and finding from the researchers in those journals are very rigorous. And even after they publish in those journals, the publication, because it's much widely read, and it is subject to more scrutiny from the public's eye. So looking at where the article is coming from is very important. Number one in MIS field is MIS Quarterly, and this was one of the journal originally published, I believe, was in University of Minnesota, and they started the MIS Quarterly, and now it's a leading journal in the MIS field. And the list go down from like 1 to 20. So if you, when you are looking for article, especially when we are conducting research on technology-related issue, you will find article. If the journal can fall into like top 20, those will be considered pretty good journal. And there are some other journal ranking, and I will go through them very quickly. The ranking I just presented to you is, I think, coming out of the first link that on the slide here, and you can also find our leading organization in MIS called the AIS, Association of Information System. They have a MIS ranking update every year, and if you compare the first one and the second one, you will more or less find they are similar. They have, well, I think the first journal list was compiled from 1 year, probably 4 or 5 years ago, from the AISnet journal ranking. The third one is called the ABDC rank. ABDC stands for Australia Business School Dean's Council, and they publish a journal list used to evaluate the publication or the productivity of their faculty members. In recent years, this particular list has been adopted by many ACSB accredited universities, including us, including UIS. So, and since it's a guideline or standard used to evaluate journal ranking, and they rank the journal from A star, A, B, and C. So if you can find the journal in those ranking, and you know they're relatively good and bad strength, then you will find it's very useful. And this particular ranking is more wider than the AIS ranking, because it does not focus on information system only. It presents a ranking covering all the business discipline, also covers some of the non-business sociology, like in the area I publish, tourism magazine and hospitality magazine. They all are covered in the ABDC list. So it's a pretty good list to use, to be used as a reference. And finally, in a lot of Asia countries, when they are evaluating their faculty member, they use the last one called the Social Science Citation Index, or SSCI, and they have a pretty wide range of publication as well. So that is another good source you might be able to get your hands on. So, well, let me change that a little bit. Click on the link. So that's going to the library. So probably the best source you can go find the research topic or article is going to our library. The reason you want to go to UIS library instead of going to Google Scholar, for example, is that you can download the full article, most likely, more or less, from our UIS library. Now, the Springfield campus is a member of a U of I system. We do have a world a world-class library available here for you. So our subscription to journal is very complete. If you cannot find in our UIS library, you can probably get a very quick interlibrary loan from our main campus, UIUC, and a UIC campus library. So that will be probably the place you should go to. Nowadays, with the VPN that provided by our library service, you can easily go through the UIS library website and get your article and download it, logging through your student account. So this is recommended. Go to the database of the UIS library search. Do not search directly from that search library box. Will probably help you to narrow down the search result a little bit better. So let's try to see what kind of database I recommend you to go. And this is a list of the database I copied from our library a few years ago. This is not the most recent one, but the one that I have highlighted using the red sort of a box, that is probably something I would recommend. You can start with the ABI Inform Global, and there are IEEE Explorer. There's a Science Citation Index. So all these are good sources. As your professor doing the research in the information system area, I probably use the ABI Inform the most. The next most popular is the Science Direct. I usually go to ABI Inform first and then go into a Science Direct and search for the journal article and compare them to get a preliminary sort of understanding about what's out there and dig more into that particular topic after that. So going to those index will be, or library will be, it's called a database index, will be a good idea. And this is a list of recommended database I mentioned. And as I described already, I use ABI Inform and Science Direct more than the rest of it. And for many technical related topic, you may find IEEE and the ACM source will be very popular. But again, the warning I mentioned earlier, you will find a lot of proceedings and practitioners journal in IEEE and ACM journals or article. Sometimes they call themselves journal, but it's actually more like a magazine or a trade journal. And you also need to learn APA style, and we are not going to be going through the entire APA style lecture here, but we do have a library presented workshop, and I present you with a recording of that APA style workshop. And this is one of the grading component in your literature review assignment. Be sure to follow the APA style, and using the style more or less correctly will help you. Do not just simply copy the format from the journal article, because every journal have their own style, and we need to be more consistent in writing our journal publication. It is important to follow a norm in a particular world. In MIS quarterly publish in APA style, so we adopt the APA style more. And the ACM and IEEE, even though that they have published many relevant articles in IS field, they do not use the APA style. So you will find that some of you will probably try to copy their style and find that you got deduct point because of that. It's not saying that you are wrong, it's just that you are not following the APA style correctly, right? And this website, apastyle.org, is probably the official website, and they have tutorial there as well. If you are interested in going to academic in the future to pursue a higher degree, PhD degree or DBA degree, and you might want to learn this a little bit more. If you're position yourself as an MIS professional, just use this as a practice to follow the writing guideline and standard. You will encounter this when you write in the future for your company about the call for proposal or code for quotation, and you have to follow certain style and the guideline as well. So more or less, this is the training to make sure you document your finding idea, present your answer in the very systematic way. So let's go into the theory. And theory is are important in terms of get to your answer or narrow down your messy problem very quickly. And these are the 4 different theory. And even though they will not be lectured extensively, but it will be a starting point for you to think about how to answer your research question correctly. And as I emphasized early, that the most important theory to learn here is a technology acceptance model. And this is probably you can call this a grandfather of MIS theory. And we use this type of theory almost everywhere. And MIS is a field working as a bridge between technical person and user study, usability study was one of probably the most important study in MIS research. So the question of why Macintosh computer feel better to use compared to Windows computer, and why Apple cell phone is more elegant than the Android or some other cell phone, even though that Android may have better functionalities. Those are the questions answered by the technology acceptance model. This is and because they are not a native to the technology itself, it's more about people's perception. So when you are talking about people's perceptions in using technology, you get into the field of psychology. And technology acceptance model is one of those theory, foundation, and framework that building the MIS field borrow from the psychology field. The other 3 are more or less like traditional psychology theory of plain behavior, Pygmalion theory, the contingent, conversion, and emergent norm theory. Some of them are individual cognitive psychology theory. The last one is more a social psychology theory. And if you understand those theory, feel free to use them more. But I will focus on the technology acceptance model here. So if you search in Google, and you will find a lot of article or a lot of web page talking about the technology acceptance model. The basic idea of acceptance model is very simple. It's describing a process of why people like or dislike, why people decide to adopt or not to adopt a particular technology. So if you in your organization says you want to push out a policy that says you want to change the password and by a certain rule, so you can make sure the security is enforced, such as the rule that we have at UIS. But that particular topic or that particular policy may or may not be followed correctly. And I know, say for example, one of the password rule in our college is that you cannot use a familiar word, or say for example your first name and last name to as part of your password. So if you use your first name and last name as part of your password, then the password engine will detect and tell you, oh, you cannot use it. But people get around with it, and so in a way that you deploy that particular policy, people don't really follow that policy. And why is that? And the answer is that usually can be answered starting from the technology acceptance model. So the whole key point about the technology acceptance model is this behavior, intention, and the attitude variable, or the so-called construct. Some models, some people, some research put behavior, intention, and attitude into one concept, which is fine. It's very similar. So the basic idea is your intention is coming out of 2 sources. One is that you feel like it's very useful for your job, for your entertainment, for your happiness. So if it's useful, you perceive that's useful, then that you feel that it can be used. The other aspect is um, you feel like it's easy to use, right? So if this is kind of convenient, so when if you take the Apple phone, you feel like it's very easy to use, right? Then you feel like it's leading to your intention to use. So the foundation of why you use a particular technology or adopt or follow a technology policy is very simple. You feel useful or you feel easy to use. And there are a lot of factors explaining why you feel that it's useful. That's something what we call external variable or precedence variable. You have a certain, say for example, functionality. If a particular technology has a lot of function, a good function feature, say for example in the cell phone, smartphone, we talk about the pixel of your camera and the wide angle of your camera lens. So those are the technical feature. The more feature, the higher the feature will lead you to the idea of, well, the better the functionality feature, the better usefulness of that particular cell phone. So that particular variable of how many feature or how important that particular feature become an external variable influence your perception for usefulness. And sometimes is the, say, for example, reputation. A company's reputation will lead you to believe that the product is useful, or leads to believe that the product is easy to use. And those will also be a factor. So a lot of these research after you adopt the technology acceptance model, your job is to identify those external variables and try to classify how these variables impact the perception of usefulness and perception of ease of use. So I encourage you to do the same thing. Say, for example, one of our recommended topic is what factor influence a particular, say, company decision to use mobile technology. And I have that particular idea coming out is that about 10 years ago, that one of the most popular smartphone used by company was not iPhone, even though iPhone was already out there in I think 2009 or 2008. But when I traveled to different countries, Canada, United States, South America, and even in Asia, I found that the enterprise user would not use iPhone as their company communication. It turns out that back then, security was, even today, security is a very important concern for using the mobile device or smartphone in company communication. And back then, the perceived reputation for security readiness, the best company was a BlackBerry. It was not Apple's or Android or Google. So a lot of enterprise users, they choose to use BlackBerry as their standard company communication. So you'll find that on the market on an airplane, business traveler will carry two smart devices, one iPhone, the other BlackBerry. BlackBerry for company communication and iPhone for their personal communication. So those are the phenomena. If you put those situations into technology acceptance model, you can probably get a sense of it. And of course, usually there will not be one variable that used to impact these variables. So when you are doing the literature search, you will be searching a lot of articles talking about different variables, and these variables can be classified and put them into external variable, and you will present a very solid theoretical framework, and that is a very logical way to answer any question you have in mind in terms of use technology or train people to use technology. If you think about this, training people to use technology is also a process of influencing people to accept a technology. So what are the factors we need to put into that? Those will be the effort. So once you, in the future, at least when you encounter the problem of why certain technology need to be used or need to be pushed, how do we train people, and how do we make people accept or how do we market a particular technology product to user. You apply this model to use in your either marketing campaign or training campaign or any other task you do internally in organization to promote technology. The technology acceptance model, I believe that its foundation is this particular model. It's called the theory of planned behavior. It presents, in the second and third phases or process of the model, it looks very similar. There is a behavior intention and leads to behavior, but before the intention, how the intention was formed is kind of named differently, in a way that the technology acceptance model is saying that all these variables, attitude, subjective norm, and perceived behavior control, they leads to the two category they were before they actually created technology intention. But in other social phenomena, social situation, say for example, why you choose UIS, not UIC, or why you choose, and those are the question you can answer broadly using the theory of planned behavior. So basically we classify the variable into three categories. A person's individual attitude is coming from his religion belief, coming from his family training, coming from the education, coming from the location he grew up with. So those are a person's attitude toward a particular topic. Then you have the subjective norm, and what does his family, his classmate, or his peer is trying to influence him. And finally, how much this person thinks that he has control over the thing. And I don't want to elaborate too much, but if you put the last category in the context of why you vote in an election for a particular candidate, that is, in some, it will be, if you think about it, there are a lot of interaction between what you believe, what other people are trying to tell you to do, and how much you feel like you have control. For example, the three factors that happen in the state of Illinois here, and state of Illinois is considered traditionally a Democrat state, so you will think that in the partisan election, your vote doesn't really count, so your personal behavioral control will be low. And the norm is something out there, and you have your own political view. So your decision will probably just be determined by your attitude and subjective norm. Say, for example, you might feel like I'm not a Democrat in the state of Illinois, and I know that you'll most likely be win by Democrat Party in the state of Illinois. So I probably will feel like even though I'm attitude toward the Republican, I may feel like, well, maybe I'll not vote because my vote will not count. So that sort of argument can be, or story can be derived from this particular model very easily. And if you think about this interaction between these three variables, you can come up with a very interesting story. You put the same context into technology acceptance and why a person using iPhone versus not using an iPhone. What is the norm? What is the people surrounding these people are talking about? Are they like young hippie generations? Everybody's using iPhone, so if you do not use iPhone, you cannot use FaceTime, and you are left out the subjective norm. And you feel like using technology, you have control. You can decide on the app that you can install on that, and you feel like Apple Store presents you with more options in that, and you have your attitude toward that Apple is a good company, and so and these attitude, the norm and the control, they interact with each other, and finally leads to a certain position that possessed by your intention, and then lead to the behavior. So those are the stories you can build, and a lot of research paper try to use this type of theory, make different interpretation, add different variable that to describe attitude, to describe norm, and your job is to identify article that talk about these variable and put those variable in the theoretical model. And there are two other psychology model. One is called Pygmalion effect, and the other is called the emergent norm theory. I'll leave these two models for you to do a little bit of research on yourself. And to do that, of course, you need to identify article that explain the theory. And these two theory, I found them useful because Pygmalion effect, this is the Greek mythology, of course, that a sculptor fall in love with his own sculpture. So, and the theory itself is basically saying that this is a self-fulfilling cycle of some sort. The expectation become your intention, and so there is a process leads you to a conversion decision on something, and that will probably lead to a more longitude, a longer observation why a person's attitude toward or intention toward a particular technology or policy change. So that can be used to build a story as well. So those are the two theory I'll leave to you as a researcher to do literature review. Now to conclude, our literature review, even though we are studying a technology acceptance or adoption problem more or less, you can change that slightly. You will feel confused, I believe, when you are selecting a topic, but hopefully you follow that the format of what factor impact a certain organization or individual's decision to use what, right? So you replace the what and factor and become your research question will be a reasonable, doable literature review as well as a future topic for your capstone project. So go ahead and work on the literature review. Feel free to post your discussion in the discussion forum so we can have feedback before you submit your assignment. And you also receive my 2 cents comments from your submission about which part you fall short and what I want to change in terms of the way you are thinking after we done the literature review. So go ahead and do your assignment, and thank you for listening.